Namaste and welcome to Vichar Month in London West. Thank you for coming to spend your Saturday evening with us. We promise to keep you hydrated and out of the rain. Just a little bit about Vichar Manthan before I introduce the topic. We're an independent, voluntary organisation and platform that seek to explore British issues through a Hindu lens. Hands up then, before we talk about the topic. Who here is married? Who here is happily married? Who here is considering getting married? That's quite awkward. I just saw a couple where only one put their hand up. I would be lying if I said that as a 20-something Hindu Indian girl, young professional in London, I'd be lying if I said that marriage wasn't a topic of conversation amongst my peers and family members, a little bit more than I'd like it to be. And my family and I were invited to attend 10 weddings this summer. We attended all of them. It was a lot of annual leave we had to take off because it's become really fashionable now to have a wedding on a Friday. And it led us to really question whether we were happy for each of the couples because of the amount of money that they spent on hosting us on their big day, or because of the genuine happiness we felt for the union or the family involved. As Asians in the UK, we spend a collective £3 billion on weddings each year. Is this in line with our Dharmic practices and values of humility, sustainability, simplicity? This is what we're here to discuss today. Just before I go on to introducing our chair, I've got a few house rules and announcements for you all to be aware of. Fire exits are either side of the seating at the back. We're not expecting any fires, but it's good to know. Bathrooms are out through this door and to the right, but I recommend that you wait until the break. It's only an hour and a half's discussion, and there'll be a break after 45 minutes, so try and hold it. There are question sheets underneath your bottoms. Well, hopefully not anymore. Those will be very crinkled. I'll stop, I promise. There are question sheets and feedback forms. During the break, we'll have some ushers coming around to collect any questions that you may have. So if you're particularly inspired by what some of the panelists are talking about, do note that down, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And yes, feedback forms are very helpful. We have a well-wishers table just to the right over there. We are a voluntary organisation, as I've mentioned, but we don't accept one-off donations. We would rather someone commit to contributing at least £1 a month to continuing, so that we can continue to have these discussions and reports and regular content on our website, and to fund some of the speakers that come and to support their travel and for them investing their time in educating us and helping us to grow. So on to our chairman. I introduce Sumit Sharma, a solutions architect from Slough who works just down the road at Rackspace. As a former Toastmasters president, he's very passionate about public speaking, and he's just set up a speakers academy called Vani. If you have any questions about that, do track him down at the end and ask him what his plans are for that, and to upskill speakers in the community. Before I hand over to him, I'd like to mention that he also is recently engaged, and so I hope that this topic will hurry him up in confirming that union. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. Over to Sumit.
Thank you all for coming. I hope this topic is of as much interest to you as it is to me. As aforementioned, yes, recently been engaged to my beautiful fiancée. Some brownie points there. But during the research for this topic in particular, there were some stats that stuck out to us. Annual British spend on the weddings themselves is £10 billion. And so Asians contribute 30% of that number, but are only 6% of the population. The average British resident will spend £22,000 on their wedding day, and that number is set to hit 30,000 by 2028. So in 10 years' time, we'll spend about 30k as an average in Britain. Asians themselves hit that number 10 years ago. So in 10 years from now, who's to say what that number will hit? And the average today is about £50,000. £50,000 is a hell of a lot of money to spend on one day or a week's celebration. As many of you will know, that the Asian wedding itself isn't just the one day, it's several days, if not weeks, of celebration and outfits and food and drink and all the other things that we sometimes think are pleasures. But are we breaking the bank? Is this the way that we should be moving? But cost is not just the barometer. What about the time and the energy and the number of people at the weddings that we attend and we go to? So typically there will be people at your wedding that you don't even know, or your parents or family members have asked to bring along, and you might not like them per se. So there's many questions that we're here to do. So Vichar Manthan is not here to provide conclusions or answers. We're here to open up this topic on an unbiased platform. I will try and remain as impartial as possible. Should weddings be simple? Should we only be looking at the Dharmic, at the simplistic way of doing things? Or is the razzmatazz okay? If you've got the money, spend it. Why not? There is one popular saying that's Mehman is Bhagwan, or our guests are gods. So are we taking this too far? Or is it just a case of it's fine to splash out, to have a big day? So say that a wedding is every girl's dream. I question if it's not just her dream, but a financial burden at the same time. And then we think about social media and the pressures we have of society, the one-upmanship, keeping up with the Joneses or the Patels, trying to outdo the other families or the society that we have around us. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do here today. Free-flowing conversation. We've got 4 expert witnesses, which I will call up one by one. We'll have a chat, we'll ask some questions. And if you have questions or comments to make during that time, please jot them down. As aforementioned, we'll have ushers that will pick them up. Then we'll have a short break, and I'll invite all of our expert witnesses to come onto stage to have a seat, and we'll have an open discussion, and then we'll go towards the end. After this session, professional videos will go up on the website, and we'll do a study and some reports to highlight some of the areas that we've picked up on. So our very first expert witness is Divya G. Prabha. She was born in the UK. She has a BA and an MA from Oxford, and worked at top American investment banks up until 1999, where she was then divinely inspired in the UK and received Diksha from Brahma Rishi. She then continued to teach yoga, philosophy and Sanskrit, and was sent to Varanasi in 2006 to further her study, and she's currently finishing her PhD in ancient grammar. She's won a gold medal in 2011 for Shastri, and is the vice chairman of the World Organization of Students and Youths. She teaches yoga and Sanskrit and delivers lectures globally. She co-founded a free Gurukul in Varanasi, where she works for the protection and promotion of Sanatan Dharma, Bharatiya Sanskriti, and with the Vedas and Shastras are taught as a way of life. So not so much prescriptive or religious, but just as a general way of life. So I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Divya Ji to the stage. So, Mr. Divya Ji, how are you doing?
Pranam.
Pranam.
Very well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's our pleasure to have you here. So for those members in the audience that don't necessarily know what Dharma is, could you help us by understanding what is Dharma?
There are many different definitions of Dharma, but one that I would like to highlight comes from Manusmriti, which gives 10 definitions of Dharma, which are Driti, Kshama, Dhammaha, Asteyam, Shaucham, Indriya Nigraha, Dhi, Vidya, Satyam, and Akrodo, Dashakam Dharma Lakshanam, which means Driti meaning fortitude, Kshama forgiveness obviously, Dhammaha control of the senses and the mind, Asteyam, non-stealing. Shaucham, purity and cleanliness. Indriya nigraha, keeping your senses under control. Dhi, wisdom. Vidya, knowledge. Satyam, truthfulness. And akrodha, non-anger. I'm not quite sure what word we would have in English for that. And those are the 10 main foundations for Dharma. One more is Vedo Kilo Dharma, which says that Dharma is the root of the Vedas, or the root of Dharma is in the Vedas. So I think that these are time-tested definitions of Dharma. And it's very easy to come up with our own interpretations of Dharma because we all have our own individual mind and intellect defined by the 3 gunas. But I think these are a good foundation for life for Dharma without having any religious intonations.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought up the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be religious. A lot of these are just way of life. So I'm not sure that everybody wrote down what all 10 of those mean, but if you were to try to maybe sum up Dharma in maybe just a sentence, as hard as that may be.
To do that, I'd like to bring in 2 more definitions. One is what a Hindu is. So my guru gave us a great definition that comes from as old as Meru Tantra. Hinsayaha duryate yasya hridayam iti sa Hindu. A Hindu is that who, by their heart, not this heart, but this heart, is far from violence, is called a Hindu. This means that it's a universal definition of how a person is supposed to be. And also, when we talk about Hindu Dharma and Bhartiya Sanskriti, I think it's important to understand what Bhartiya is, which doesn't mean that it's connected to where you were born or that your roots come from India, but Bharat. Bhayam rati iti bharatam. Bhayam is Bha Prakashane, means lightful, full of light, special light. So that which is joined to light is Bharat. And light is knowledge. And so when we talk about our Dharma, our Sanskriti, we're actually talking about a state of being, a level of inner elevation beyond the mind, ego, and intellect. And it also reflects a level of expansiveness in our consciousness. And that is what is defining what a Hindu is, what Bhartiya Sanskriti is, what Dharma is. And I think that those... So when we say what is Dharma, I think you want to... It's actually the ideal human being that is behaving in a way that doesn't harm other people, is using their own rights to the best of their ability for not just themselves as an individual, but for the society as a whole.
So you don't have to be so much born a Hindu or prescribed to a religion of such. Just being a good human being, you prescribe Hindu values within yourself as a good human.
And that in itself connects you to a higher cause by its very nature.
Thank you. So let's take the definition of Dharma and what a Dharmic attitude is and apply that to a wedding. So what would you say then a Dharmic wedding looks like or feels like?
Well, I think first that we have from ancient times originally 48 sanskaras, which have then been brought down to 16 sanskaras. And these 16 sanskaras contain obviously marriage, vivaha. But first, what I'd like to say is that these 16 sanskars are designed to effectively keep us on track. They're protecting us and they're bringing in purifying energy and positive energies throughout the whole process, from the point of conception, Garbhodan, to the cremation at the very end. And so halfway through this we have vivaha, and of course we have 8 different kinds of vivaha. But it's important to remember that these are all stages of life connected to the 4 ashramas which have been going through since Upanishadic times, brahmachari ashram, grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram, and sannyasa ashram. And the purpose of life overall, we are told, purushartha chatushtayam, dharma artha kama mokshanam, purushartha chatushtayam, means that the purpose of life ultimately is to attain moksha, liberation, and the path to that is dharma, art, not necessarily meaning wealth, but wealth of knowledge also, calm, and ultimately moksha. So vivah, and marriage and a wedding, comes in the very midst of this, designed to take us on the path to liberation. And why is that marriage so important in that? In fact, in the times of the Smritis, a marriage is considered not only obligatory, but also the easiest path to gain moksha, because it's much easier to detach yourself from the world within, very much ingrained in the world, immersed in the world. So when you have the actual wedding ceremony and then you have the marriage, a couple of things come out of this. Marriage is defined as a sacrifice, actually, in the Shastras, giving up your individuality for the union. And also, as a consequence of the marriage, within the marriage, it's generally hoped that there would be progeny, there would be children born. And by the children being born, of course, you have then the completion of the 3 rins, the debt to your ancestors. By having your ancestors, by having a child, you're able to serve your ancestors. I think everyone knows that we've just completed Pitri Paksh. And so by having a child, you're able to feed and water your ancestors. So in the whole concept of dharma and Bharti Sanskriti, marriage has a very, very important place in order for you to complete the purpose of your birth. But it's not an easy one, of course. Oh, yeah. No, even they say it is a sacrifice in the texts themselves.
So anyone that's got married, well done. You have sacrificed for your partner. Sacrificed your identity almost, but for the greater good. So then, what is then a marriage? So apart from the rituals and the symbolism that they hold, which I'll agree are important, what is a marriage?
I'll try to answer that question. Maybe I could start with the actual wedding day, because when you are bringing 2 people together for a lifelong commitment, it has 20 plus steps according to the ritual process, apart from the actual agreement. But on the actual day of the wedding, you obviously have the walking around of the fire, you have the tying of the knot, you have the passing of the hand from the father to the future son-in-law. And all of these rituals are symbolic, but they also work on a subtle basis, because throughout the period of the actual wedding, you have Vedic mantras being chanted. The definition of a mantra is mananat trayate iti mantra. That which protects you from the cogitations of the mind is called a mantra. So throughout the process of the wedding, you have special magical Vedic sounds being repeated for auspicious energy for the union of these 2 people, which is being witnessed by the families. And those energies are to dispel hostile energies, dispel negative energies that are coming from their past or the surrounding environment, but also bringing divine blessings hopefully by raising your consciousness to a higher level through the different koshas. And then with the process of the union of that wedding, the idea is that you will then be able to continue as a team, because when you've been handed from the father to the son-in-law, I don't know how many people have done this, but there sometimes is an exchange of rice as well, which actually symbolizes and is supposed to show how you will be nourished by your the son-in-law's family's food, as opposed to the fields of your father. So there are very subtle energies involved as well as the actual rituals, which are designed to create a great platform to you move forward on together.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And so then, could you tell us a little bit more about the connection of the two individuals losing personal egos and connecting to each other? How important is that then going forwards? Especially in today's modern society, very much individualistic about who you are as a person, bringing these two people together, losing that. How important is that?
It's probably the most important thing, because first of all, you need a unified goal. Whatever the foundation of the marriage is, there needs to be a common aim. And the nature of man is individual. So if we consider that my particular mind, ego, and intellect will have a specific energy, say it's blue, say yours is red, your combination. Now, if we both look at something yellow, I'm going to say it's green, and you're going to say, no, but it's orange. And this is the crux of difficulties within individuals, within marriages, and within society as a whole. And so spiritual development is the easiest thing to be able to surpass this, to get beyond that individual level of thinking, beyond the Rajaguna, Tamaguna, and Sataguna. And so a shared spiritual path is something that's very supportive to help a couple get through problems, because there always are going to be problems. It's the nature of life itself. And you can either support that through strong psychology and having great control of your own mind and intellect, or through practices. I mean, Dharma has a fantastic practice like yoga that actually helps you raise your consciousness so that you don't face these ego clashes, which are bound to happen. It's the nature of nature.
So these things sound very idealistic. I think modern couples today, especially in modern Britain, may struggle to, one, identify, but two, fulfill or carry out some of these practices. So then if we take the modern construct, modern weddings, especially in Britain, do you think they are dharmic?
I mean, when you say a modern wedding, do you mean a modern Indian wedding, or...
Let's say a modern British wedding.
You always have to look at the context of their background, what they understand. So it doesn't, because they don't have the rituals, etc., doesn't mean that there cannot be a foundation for a great marriage. There obviously can be, and it's ultimately determined by those two individuals, how prepared they are, how intellectually and mentally prepared and developed they are as individuals, and how committed they are to the concept of marriage as well, because it requires an enormous amount of commitment, because I think that it would be very hard to find anyone in the world that says their marriage was a bed of roses. It really is something that has to be worked on. But what I would say, though, is the structure of an Indian wedding is a lot more supportive to have a foundation for a marriage than something that doesn't have the ritual side of it, but not as a religious practice, but because of the energy that it brings to it. And of course you have the support of the community and other things. So I mean, it's very hard to say that's right and that's wrong, because it really, at the end of the day, is down to those two individuals.
Well avoided. So, okay, beginning to wrap up. So then, what do you think, perhaps, if required, society needs to do in order to regain that, the value or the virtue of Dharma, maybe more directive towards Indian weddings? Does society need to do something to align us back to what Dharma says? Or is it okay just to let it happen?
I think it's incredibly hard to say what anyone should do. What I would love to see is, a little bit of returning to the roots and remembering what the purpose behind what we are doing. Because when we understand the reason behind any of our actions, it's a lot easier to go through with that action. It's about balance. Hindu Dharma, Bharatiya Sanskriti, ultimately is always about balance and whether it's appropriate within your community. At the end of the day, it's a very happy day, but we've got to remember that happiness, sukhi sadhan, happiness is not necessarily from money, but the actual Sanskriti that we have supporting our way of life. And having been through, as you mentioned, I've really experienced the great aspects of a Western life and successful, financially successful life, academically successful life. But what I've experienced in my own life, it wasn't enough. And going into Dharma, into practice, into Sanskriti was what gave me that sense of completeness. And so if I could say anything, is I would want to, if I could do anything for society, it would be to urge them to seek that sense of completeness, to bring balance into their lives, and then they'll know for themselves what to do when it comes to the wedding and the marriage.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Divyaji. I think we've learned quite a lot there. And again, if you guys have questions for Divyaji specifically, or comments on the whole, please write those down. We'll collect them later. We're going to let you go now, and we'll bring you back on later. Thank you very much. So a very dharmic, very idealistic overview of perhaps not what should be, what the potentials that we could have to achieve happiness by not necessarily subscribing to a religion, but having virtues and values within yourself, connecting with your partner, losing your own ego, and together traveling upon the journey of life to ultimately seek a form of happiness. Our next expert witness that we have then is Pranav Banot. I've known him for many years. He was recently named top 100 most influential people in shaping UK and India relations. He's involved in local UK, national and Indian politics. He is the convener of the UK and India Young Leaders Forum, co-chair of the India and UK Legal Exchange Programme, where he's working to create policies for stronger UK and India post-Brexit ties, especially for millennials. He's the editor of a book called The Living Bridge, which is a UK and India diaspora and the rise of millennials. He advised the Indian Minister for External Affairs, the Raj Sabha member, and also the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sport on strategies in which India can more effectively engage with the British Indian diaspora. He's also the former president of BPP Law School in London and the former president of the National Hindu Student Forum in the UK. He recently was also a candidate in the local elections and by profession is a litigation solicitor. So let's welcome Pranav Banot to the stage then, please. So Pranav, tell me, I've seen some of your wedding videos online on YouTube, some national press. Do you think it's fair to say you had a rather grand, large wedding?
Well, there was about 500 people there, so I think it was large. Probably smaller than many other Indian weddings with 500 people. Here some have about 1,000, but yeah, it was a large wedding. Yes.
Slightly different also in maybe the number of events, and I mean your first dance has got a sheer number of views on YouTube. Was it scary being at the heights? Prepared for that?
Well, it was certainly something that Shafali, my wife, who's sitting in the audience, and I always had in our minds when we were going to perform our first dance. Yeah, it was an interesting experience. It was a different experience. Yeah.
Different for sure. And so the 500 people that were there, you...
that was a reception that had less.
Okay.
That was the reception. The wedding had 500.
Right.
Yes.
How many at the reception?
About 350.
350.
So yeah, still a sizable number.
And you knew them all?
I'd say we knew about I mean, I guess I knew the people from my side. I think Shafali would have known everyone on her side. I can't say I knew everyone on her side and she knew everyone on my side, but knew the vast majority, I must say.
But you know them all now, just to create those ties.
I'll say yes
We'll
for
have
now,
to say yes.
so I'm not going to get in any trouble when I go home.
Brilliant. But you've already sacrificed by being married, so that's okay.
So I've learned.
If we think about, so we're saying, okay, your wedding had 500, other weddings have thousands at large venues and locations. Is it okay? Is it fair to say that weddings are getting out of control, slightly irrational, a lot of one-upmanship going on? Are we going too far?
Look, my view is this. See, Indian weddings are quite distinct in their own right, and I think Indians should be proud of it. You know, when an Indian gets married, whether they're Hindu or Sikh or from some other religion, it's more than just the bride and the groom getting married. You know, it's a marriage of families. I married a Gujarati, I'm a Punjabi. It's a marriage of communities. It's a marriage of states. It's a marriage of, I have a certain Hindu community I'm part of. Shafali had another Hindu community she was part of. It's a marriage of two massive communities. So I must say that, yes, lots of people come to weddings, and it can sometimes get out of control. But I think that's part of our rich diversity and our rich culture, that actually we can have, you know, two communities coming together and celebrating, you know, from different parts of Africa, from different parts of India, you know, from different languages, different foods, different religions, all under one roof, celebrating the union, or celebrating, as Divyaji said, you know, the sacrifice one's making. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that life has to offer when you can do that.
Yeah, it's definitely amazing, and I look forward to my wedding once organised. More brownie points. What kind of pressure were you under to increase the size of your wedding, personally speaking? Were you under pressure?
I wouldn't say we're under pressure. I think that there is there's sacrifices that you have to make, as Divyaji said. You know, when two people get married, they have their own ideas of how many people they may want, who comes, you know, who's on the guest list, who isn't. So there are pressures like that, and that actually, that's one of the biggest tests of getting married. If you haven't already experienced it, you very quickly will. You know, is trying to negotiate how you manage the logistics and the you know, the operation of organising a wedding. It does take some negotiation on both sides. But you know, what's so important is that doesn't blind you from the responsibility of a marriage, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that shortly.
Yeah. So aside from pressures maybe from family or from society to make it glamorous, what then is the difference between a wedding and a marriage, in your view?
It's a really good question. I mean, what I think is, going back to your original question, between the difference is, you know, you've got to make a marriage work longer than that one day. You can have the most amazing wedding that can end very quickly, you know. You could split up. The divorce rates are very high.
50% in the UK.
50%, exactly. Yeah. I mean, one thing my dad always said is the reason why Indians have such low divorce rates is because no mum and dad or in-laws want to pay again for another wedding.
It's true. It's true. You say they're low. I mean, Indian divorce rates are actually at 33%, so not far off.
So it's not far off. So actually, that's
Britain.
quite worrying. But this is a point. Okay, I think that marriage is a vocation, in my view. You never stop learning with with marriages. I read 2 books before I got married. I went on 3 relationship courses before I got married. It sounds a little anal, I confess. However, I go to the gym to look after my body. I read books in order to be the best lawyer I could be. But where is that education in terms of being a good husband? And I'm not saying for 1 minute I'm the most perfect husband. And you can talk to my wife about that by the drinks table later. But there is training that is needed in a marriage that may not necessarily be necessary in a wedding. And I think that's really the difference. You're always needing to better yourself when you're in a marriage. Whereas a wedding lasts no longer than a day or 5 at the most.
And yours was a little longer, with weeks of celebration.
It was 5 events over 5 weeks, but that's purely because there was no venues available. So anyone getting married, book up very fast. We'll speak to Hina.
We'll be bringing Hina Ji on later. She can plug. So, okay, let's go back to the extent of the marriage and spending money, which is okay to do, is it not better to maybe use that money to acquire a property or benefit the couple as an individual rather than spend it on the one day or on the 5 weeks?
Well, the short answer is, of course, if you have funds that you can invest in a property as an asset, not a liability, yeah. You only have to read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad to learn that, for anyone who hasn't read that. It's a fantastic book. But it's a day which you hope will only come once in your life, or a ceremony that will only happen once in your life. And I think it's quite nice if you can invest a bit of time, and if you have the means to do so, not to go over and above your means, to dedicate a bit of expense to it. Because, actually, there's very few real duties, I think, as a husband I have to my wife when we organise a wedding, or a parent has to their son. And I think one of the duties is to try and give you an ideal day that you want, And I don't think throwing money is an ideal thing, but having the wedding that you want is potentially an idealistic kind of way to operate.
Sure. So, getting to the crux of one of my questions, Divyaji's definition of what Dharmic wedding is, do you think your wedding was Dharmic?
Well, I can say that we made sure that everything we possibly could for it to be Dharmic was done to the best of our ability. Now, that's not to say it was perfect, but we sat down with the Pandit before. We paid more to actually a Pandit. And let me say one thing. The good Pandits charge triple just because they want to speak in English and just because they want to provide translation. But we pay triple because we wanted our wedding day to be an education not just for my wife and I, so we knew what was going on, but an education for everybody there. And so I think we hit and we did everything we needed to do and understood everything we needed to do in order for that sacrament to be sacred. Yeah. And we had to pay more because actually the priests do charge more if you want it to be said in a certain way or done in English or have flyers given out to everyone to explain what's going on. Yeah. So, that all comes at an expense. And actually, the bastions of a Hindu wedding are the Pandits. But some of the best Pandits out there are the most expensive, which goes back to your original question. Should you spend money on it? Well, we have no choice. Yeah. You don't have a choice because if you want to give everyone a Dharmic experience and you want to understand what goes into a wedding, then you've got to, that comes out of, people are trying to make their living in this country. Yeah.
Expense, it's difficult to spare. Okay, so then what sacrifices do you think you've made towards your marriage? So aside from caste and things that you have to do for your wife, any other personal sacrifices you've had to make sure that it wasn't just about the wedding day, as glamorous as it was, but the marriage in itself?
Well, if you speak to my wife, she'll probably say I need to make more sacrifices. I'll tell you that. But I mean, you are. I think every day is a sacrifice to an extent. One thing with Indians, I think there's a culture of not living together before you get married. And I'll tell you one thing: when you get married and you start living together, it hits you for 6. And Sumit, you'll realise if you aren't already living together, because. All of a sudden, you've got people from 2 different households, 2 different cultures, 2 different communities, 2 different ways in which they spend their own time under one roof, and all of a sudden, you've got to make it work. Yeah. And actually, every day, there is some sacrifice one has to make. I mean, whether Shafali would choose to spend a Saturday afternoon listening to me talk, when she hears me talk all day, might well be a sacrifice. But these are things that I think every day is a sacrifice that one has to make. And that's not a negative. I think sacrifice is one of the most beautiful things, as Divyaji said. Yeah. Because what better service can you give to somebody you've chosen to spend the rest of your life with than giving sacrifice?
Brilliant, definitely. Okay then, so do you think the state, the institution that we have of a wedding is it still about the wedding anymore, or is the institution of the marriage more important? So not talking from experience, if we see that some of the stats that we've talked about earlier, divorce rates being so high, which one is given more importance?
Well, I think actually weddings are given a lot of importance, and I very much believe that the institution of marriage should be given more importance. I completely believe that. I believe people should invest more time before their wedding day in learning actually what it really truly means to be in a marriage. And actually more time and effort should be invested in that, whether it is sitting with a Guruji, whether it is reading books, whether it is going on relationship courses. People laughed at me when I went on a relationship course before I got married. But that's because I needed to learn what it actually means to be, a good husband. What does it actually mean? So actually there is more of an investment that is absolutely needed. But if I can say one thing, I think there's this thing between substance and form. Now, the substance of marriage is learning and understanding the Dharmic principles that underlie a wedding. The form is how you want to do this razzmatazz that you say. I have no issue with anyone in choosing whatever form or razzmatazz they want to do. That's a personal choice. That's not for me to say to anybody. But what I do very much want to say is that the substance has to be there. If a couple don't understand the principles that are actually embedded and underlying their married life, then it's no point. There's no point in, doing the extravagance.
And does that view change in any way being a lawyer? Does your profession cast a different lens upon this?
Well, to an extent. So I founded a website called theweddinglawyer.co.uk. And what we do is we try to resolve wedding-related disputes. So disputes with suppliers, disputes with couples. We put them through to divorce lawyers. And actually one thing I found, I'll tell you an interesting thing. So recently, there was a couple that were dating for 10 years. They were dating for 10 years. They got married, and they split up after about 3 months. Now, what I learned from that is that I think people think when you get married, everything changes. When you have that wedding day, something will change, something will happen, and all of a sudden, everything will just work out. And that's not the case, unfortunately. And that goes back to my original question, my original answer, whereby I think there needs to be more of an investment in understanding what it actually truly means to be to be married, rather than just looking forward to a wedding day. And it comes back to the Ramayana, right? Everyone needs to try and be that ideal Ram or that ideal Sita. I don't say for 1 minute I'm ideal. I think I've got a long way to go. But as long as every day you're trying to find a way to improve, and your partner's also trying to find a way to improve, I think that's really the secret of success. And I've only been married for 2 years, so I probably, I'm looking at some of the older people in the audience, and I'm sure you can tell me other secrets, but that's one of the secrets I've learned in 2 years.
Very nice, and very sweet. More brownie points this way. So then, just to tie off, you've shared your experiences from your profession, personally speaking as well. What do you think, if we could sum it up for our audience, is the secret to a sustainable marriage?
Well, I can tell you the secret after 2 years of being married. Just let her win. No, no, it's not that at all. I think the secret is this. I think there's an element of compromise. There's an element of humility. So putting away the egos as far as you can, and always trying to find ways to improve that relationship. You're a team, as Divyaji said. And any football team, any cricket team, any kabaddi team. I know there's some kabaddi players in the audience. Any team that you have, if you're not always looking to improve and looking at ways in which you can better align your tactics, that team's going to fail at some point. Okay, and I think there's always that continual learning process, and as long as you're always willing to learn and willing to be better than you are, then I think you may be on safe ground. But I've only been married for 2 years, so
willing to learn.
Don't hold me to this. That's all I'm sure there's plenty more I've got to learn.
Willing to grow together. That's definitely great sentiments, Pranav. I think, again, for the audience, any questions you have, any thoughts you've got about what Pranav's just said, please jot them down. And I thank you for having us on Staggering. Thank you. Our third expert witness here today then is Hina Solanki. She is a graduate in Business and Information Systems, has worked as an IT consultant for 18 years for PwC and IBM, also the founder and director of a company called Event Gurus, which is a corporate event management and specialist in bespoke wedding decor, which started in 2002. planning over 60 weddings and events a year. Very successful in managing key high-profile corporate events in the UK, such as UK India Week, the Asian Achievers Awards, the Asian Charity Awards, and also when Prime Minister Modi came to London. Happily married with 2 children, involved in various charitable initiatives such as the Sewa shop in Edgware, Seva Day, and also started something called the HWC, the Hindu Women's Convention, along with the Hindu Sevaka Samiti UK, which is an online webinar platform for women to collaborate on various topics. She has a passion for creativity. She drives to deliver weddings and events to a high quality and has been there to watch the industry evolve and grow, transform, and especially over the past 15 years with her business, has really watched that evolution. She loves Jai. Sorry, we don't have Jai today. An expert negotiator and actually loves to haggle. So please join me in welcoming Hina Ji to the stage. Can you share with us your thoughts on a typical wedding day that you would organize as part of your company?
There's going to be 2 aspects. One, I would probably talk about what I did 15 years ago, and one I'm doing that would do in the current years. So typically 15 years ago, I'd be talking to the bride, her family, talking about what they want. They would come to me with all their information and we would plan the wedding. That means they would have their photographers, the groom would have his photographers, they would have photo list and everything, and there would be a set. Can we have this in a mandap? Yes. Can you have this? No. And there'd be no negotiations with the companies or the suppliers. It's very rigid. Hence, we started our company where we wanted to give what the customers wanted. Now, if I typically talk about a bride and groom now, it's the bride and groom coming to me, what they two want, not what the family wants. So they would go back to the family and say, okay, this is what we've decided. There would be a lot more of the wedding coordinator, wedding management. So the families they're in there to enjoy.
So just to touch on that quickly. So the bride and groom are coming to you separate from what their parents and their society are saying to do? They have requests that aren't matching up with what everyone else wants?
I think there's more of that the groom should be part of, because it's the groom's big day as well. Typically before, the bride used to pay for the whole wedding and the receptions, and now it's gone 50-50. So the groom has an input into what they want. So the bride and groom come and say, we would like this, we'd like that, and then we would tailor it. We would design a mandap to the certain stage and talk to their suppliers, negotiate with the suppliers, and get them to a budget that they're comfortable with. But they would take all that information and relay it back to the family.
So less families coordinating with you, it's more the bride and groom, it's their special day.
Bride and groom is definitely the coordinator. And I have had instances where on the day I've had the Maharaj doing something and the bride's mother saying, well, why is he doing this? And I said, well, this is what's been organised. And they go, well, we didn't know. And I said, well, you need to talk that out with your daughter, and we need to get on with the day. So sometimes the information is not relayed, or the bride and groom have misunderstood the Maharaj of what they was expected. So we just have to just keep the ball rolling for the day and then take that offline.
That's a regular occurrence?
It's getting more and more, yes.
Wow, high pressure. And then if we think about, so obviously you deal with high profile events, you've done some extremely large weddings as well. Do you think spending is getting out of control?
Totally. I'm in the industry, this is my bread and butter. And I should be actually thinking, yeah, it's fine. But actually, ethically, I don't feel comfortable. And whether the parties are of equal status or one's low and one's high, or they both are on a budget, I will always suggest an alternative. Or how about artificial flowers? Because 8 foot high, no one's going to say, oh, Hina, oh my God, you gave me artificial flowers, if they look of that quality. So I would always give them an alternative. But then at the end of the day, if they do want to spend that money, that's fine. I will arrange it.
So it's in your best interest, right, to benefit from that.
Yeah.
So then where does your ethical, moral compass and the pocket, what range are you at? Are you constantly out of battle or happy to pay? I'll take your money?
I have mixed. clienteles in that some people, before we used to get married in sports halls and, simple wedding venues, and now we've gone to banquet estates, but now we've gone one step further. We're doing destination weddings.
Yeah.
Italy, Spain, Greece, all these venues, people are going out there, and they're going out in numbers of 200 to 300 people, which is a big expense for individual families to fork out.
Is that, so the destination weddings, I've been on a few myself.
Yeah.
Are they because of the grandeur of the fact that it's a destination, or is it to invite less people to the wedding, in your experience, have you seen?
No, I think it's more to do with they want something different. They want to be seen to be doing something different. And this also plays a big part that social media is actually putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people that, so this person's done this, I need to do something better. How can I be different? So they go to different destinations and have, there's still an average of 200, 300 people going out because our families aren't that small. At least, 50, 60 people will come out of one family.
And you have to invite them all.
You have to invite them all.
Have to?
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't get much of a say.
And, a lot of people are doing Friday, Monday to Thursday weddings because they are cheaper. They're not that cheaper, but they are cheaper than the weekend rates.
So we talk about the social media pressure, the wedding industry itself and the markets, perhaps not necessarily gimmicks, but seducing clients into spending and having the 8-foot flowers and going on destinations. So what responsibility do you think companies like yourself and the rest of the market should take? Do they have a responsibility towards this, as you said, the irrational spending? Is there responsibility there?
I feel personally, I feel guilty. So I do give the clients the option saying, what have you thought about this? Or maybe from the wedding day, we could add a bit of this and turn it into this. But there are companies out there that are actually capitalizing on this market. And it's absolutely insane how Pranav was talking about the Maharajas. And the Maharajas are the key people. From my wedding time, it was a case of just give me an envelope of what you think is right, and my mum gave the envelope. I don't even know what she gave, but now they're asking for £1,800, £2,000, and they're doing 2 weddings a day. So what typical one was we were in Birmingham, we had this Maharaj, and we were finishing off, and he finished and went somewhere, and we came back to the London wedding, and guess who was there?
He was there.
He was there. And we were like going, so how did you make it? And he goes, I just told the other family what to do in the end ceremony. And we said, oh, cool.
Nice. And these weddings that you see and you conduct, do you see dharma there? Or is it just the showmanship and the razzmatazz?
I see a lot more razzmatazz now because the Maharaj comes now the Maharaj comes with a DJ. You have to have the DJ. And it's very dramatic, the sindoor and everything. Wait, the camera, the roll, the pictures, the music, everything has to be in place, and then you can go around and then do your ceremony. Wow. It's there, but it's very dramatic.
It's sort of sidelined to what we see these days. Actually, is the wedding is dictated by the photographer. So once everything's in place and the DJs. Do you then see a distinction between the idea of a marriage and a wedding?
I do. I see the amount of money that's been spent in a wedding, and I do know how marriages are falling apart. I think the amount of the marriage is a one-day expense, but the weddings are one-day expense, but marriage is a long lifetime, hopefully a commitment, and people should invest in marriages because we're spending an average spend on an Asian wedding, we're looking at £60,000-70,000 with the gold. Now no one goes to shops to buy saris. They're all designing bridal suites and everything. Yeah. So
there's designer brands out there now.
We're designing mandaps because our standard stuff is not good enough. So
people don't want that?
No, can you have it? So someone needs to use it.
I'll have to ask. We'll see who's got the purse strings.
So I think a lot. So all this comes with an expense, and hen parties, the stags. Before it was down in the city. Now people are going abroad. People are. They've got an expense, so they do mini moons before they do honeymoons.
Yeah, I see that too. Would the the Dharmic perspective on simplicity and frugality work against your line of work? So I know you say you feel guilty,
Yeah.
but how far will it be that perhaps your business isn't as successful as it is? Would that be a problem to you? What would you do?
No, I think that's why we actually don't need to advertise, and clients come to us because we give the honest opinion and we give them options, whereas you go to other people and you sit down in front of them, you tell them, and that's what they'll do. They won't go out their way, but I think people need to understand, what are we doing this for? We're getting married. It's a one-day commitment, to all these suppliers, to everything, and we're spending a fortune. But then when it comes to buying a house, going somewhere on holiday, you can't afford it. So why are we putting ourselves out? And we have bride and grooms, and they're burnt out by their wedding day.
Yeah, and the parents too.
And the parents are fed up because they're always constantly arguing with their kids. Kids are saying, I want 200 people. Families said they want, they've got big families, long-standing relationships, and they want 500 people. I would say let the families invite them. Do another event, a smaller event, and let the families enjoy that.
Yeah.
But
and then you benefit from two events.
But I think the brides and grooms are burning out because there's so much pressure, and they're working full-time, and they have to do things in a certain manner. So they just need to, I personally think people need to let go, come back to the base and do what is right and simple.
How or what needs to be done to then scale down this investment? What should modern couples be doing instead of spending the big bucks?
Well, I think you need to also look at, it comes down to status in that if you can afford it, fine. But if the parties aren't equal, there's a lot of pressure on the other party. So you need to find a fine balance that, okay, do I really need to spend £50 on per table decoration that people are going to sit there for 2 hours and then end up on the dance floor drunk? It's this thing like, do we have a 3-course meal or do a 4-course meal? People are always going to criticize good things and bad things. So you need to do what you think is right, and you need to make a long-term plan that, okay, after marriage, what are we planning to do? Okay, we're going to buy a house, or shall we do 3 holidays a year? That's more of an investment.
Yeah, into the actual couple itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so so obviously you're organising these big events, and some of them are dharmic, some are not. Should, let's say, alcohol be at a dharmic wedding? You've probably seen both sides of the coin.
Yeah. I can't, unfortunately, control that. The only thing I can do is a lot of people do have alcohol at their events. We just take all the Ganeshas and any religious things out, and let them carry on. And we would say, they say, can you leave the entrance, which has a Ganesh or something? We would say, no, we can't leave it there. We would be ethical, and we would remove it ourselves.
Taking the ethical approach, that's great to hear. So you've married off lots of people, you've done their weddings, you've been married yourself for a long time. What would you tell our audience is the secret to a sustainable marriage?
Wow.
Got Nileshji on camera, right?
Yeah. Mandap anyone? No. So I think there's two things. I mean, for me and Nilesh, we're actually a really good team in that we have understanding. Nilesh is socially very heavily involved in Sangh. So I have the understanding that he has a passion for something. I didn't know what Sangh was until I got married. And I walked into our bedroom, and a spare bedroom, and there was this massive picture of this single. And I go, who's this? And he goes, this is Guru Gobind Singh. I go, is this some of your relative or something?
Wow.
I didn't know who he was. And they go, no, he's part of Sangh. And he told me the whole story. And I said, okay, right, you didn't tell me this when we were together. But there needs to be a lot of compromise. And I do feel bride and grooms are not compromising, and little things are bugging them, and they head straight to the courts, or they go back to their homes and they don't talk and they don't resolve things. So I think there needs to be a little bit of give and take and a little bit of cooperation, because everyone's getting married later, 30 plus. which is fine, careers and everything is great, but then you get set in a certain mindset, and as Pranav said, that, all of a sudden you have to live together. There's not that cooperation or understanding, and that little things like, the towels on the floor. You always leave the towel on the floor, and it's just like, Nilesh does that still now, 17 years on, he still does it.
Constant communication, lots of sacrifice.
Absolutely. And for the bride and grooms, I would say, I think you need to go back to the drawing board and talk about budgets. It's really key. It's no point of going on social media and saying, well, you know what, he did this, they went here, and she, look at her dress, it's been designed by so-and-so. Do what's in your capacity. And if you are planning after marriage that I'm going to go on 3 holidays, that's your investment. That's not investment to the society, because they're going to talk.
That's true. They will always have those comments.
Yeah.
So again, for the audience, if you have questions for Hinaji, you can write them down. We'll have ushers that will collect them, and we'll thank Hinaji for taking on stage. Thank you very much. Our fourth and final expert witness today is Mary Lou Waller. She grew up in Durban, South Africa, has lived in the UK for almost 18 years, 10 of which have been at Rackspace, where we both work. Happily married to Stephen for the last 8 years. As well as her managerial role at Rackspace, she's also studying environmental science with the Open University, loves to read, loves the ballet and being out in all types of weather. Please join me in welcoming Mary Lou to the stage, please. So, stark contrast to some of the things that we've seen and talked about. So, just for some context, I used to report into Mary Lou. She was my manager, excellent manager. And
you don't have to say that anymore. I don't approve your holidays anymore.
True.
So it's fine.
And the story came about, and the reason I personally brought Mary Lou onto stage is there was a colleague of ours that was recently arranging his marriage, and through some of the meetings that were had, Mary Lou was dumbfounded by the amount of time and expense that was going into such an affair. And obviously, once I got engaged, Mary Lou was asking me, like, are you going to have to go through, some of that? Short answer is probably. But this is why we're here today, to discuss and hopefully change some of those narratives. So Mary Lou, tell us a little bit about your wedding then, which
Sure.
is very different.
It's going to be very different for everyone in the audience. We got engaged towards the end of 2007, and it took us about 2.5 years to decide what to do. Not to actually plan the wedding, but what to do, because we had family back home in South Africa, family here, friends everywhere. So do we go back home, make everyone fly home? Do we stay here, make people fly here instead? Spend the money that is spent on a normal English wedding, potentially get ourselves into debt, or spend the money that we're saving for a house on a wedding on the day, and then spend a little bit more time saving for the house. And eventually one day, my husband, who is a little bit more traditional than I am, so I was very surprised, turned around and said, forget it, this is too much stress, let's just go away. Let's just do this, go on a destination wedding. And I was like, yes, this is the best news, no planning, hassle or anything. So I had a look around to decide what was the easiest in terms of making sure passports and all that nonsense. Because initially we thought Vegas, if it's just going to be going away, let's have a bit of fun. But then we were like, paperwork's too much of a nightmare. So we decided on Jamaica. And then we realized that where we were going, because we were going to go destination wedding and have it fairly small, we would spend on that, right? So make the most of it. Top hotel, top wedding package, as they do in these destination hotels. But we realized that not everyone who would want there could afford it. So we decided that rather than put them under pressure as well, it was an all or nothing situation, and so we decided that it would just be the two of us. So it was just two of us at our wedding in Jamaica, other than the witnesses, but they were from the hotel. So one was the wedding planner, and I use that word like very loosely, and the other was just another member of staff. So it took me about an hour to plan my wedding.
Wow.
Because I got there, I booked a holiday, basically. I booked a holiday for 10 days to Jamaica. And then when we got there, we spent an hour with the wedding planner. And I went, I would like that cake and those flowers, and here's my music. And that was it. And then back to the beach. And it was fantastic. There was no pressure. It was just so much fun. It was the two of us for 10 days. We had a beautiful holiday. I have to say, social media, photos in Jamaica, does your social media profile no harm. Everyone thought they were fantastic. So, tick that box. But yeah, that was our wedding. It was just the two of us. But we weren't, after that, in debt. It was paid. We had a fantastic wedding moon, as they call it. And when we came back, we celebrated with our families, like our parents, when we came back. We just had a little celebration with them.
Yeah,
so
no,
that's the wedding.
that's fine. So, amazing. So with your parents and your family not being there with you on the day, one would question, do they not matter as much? Did they not want to be a part of the experience? How did you feel not having them there?
So it was, I think, a bit more difficult for my husband because he's very close to his family. But they, on the flip side of that, are very understanding. So when we told them what we were going to do and why we were going to do it, they were actually really pleased for us because they realized we were doing it for the right reasons. We were doing it because it was what was right for us, and it had nothing to do with anyone else. My parents, on the flip side, were a little less happy with it, but the decision wasn't theirs. I know that I'm a little bit, non-traditional when it comes to kind of my approach with family, so it probably doesn't resonate too well. But yeah, they weren't necessarily pleased, but it was what suited us at the time. So we did it, and we had a wedding video and everything, and obviously we celebrated with people when we got back, and we watched the video, and it was, it was fun.
And do you think, so your parents weren't best pleased, but eventually forgave you. Did that have an impact on your relationship going forward? Is it still a topic of conversation today?
Yes, in the way that if we had to do it again, with all the things the way it played out, will we do it that way? And the answer is yes, 100%. It just suited us. Sometimes I feel bad when I talk to people who are going through so much stress and paying so much money for their weddings, because I was so lucky in that my husband wanted to do this way, and also not really like spend the money, and also that his parents and eventually my parents were quite accepting of it. So I was very fortunate in that we were able just to make it about us rather than everyone else.
Yeah. So this approach you took was very personal. You took it upon yourselves to do so. Would you recommend that to anyone, or recommend people not to do that?
I'm going to get into a lot of trouble, I think, if I would love to recommend it. Obviously, culturally, I know it's difficult it's such a huge step away from what I know people in the room really, would be expected to do. I would highly recommend it if that's something that everyone in the family is comfortable with. It was just a lot of fun, and it was basically just like getting married on a great holiday. The only thing is I had to, because I'm probably like the palest person on the planet, and I went to Jamaica, so I had to avoid the sun for 5 days so that I didn't have tan lines in my photos. But, I'd like to go back and maybe do that slightly differently. But I recommend it only from the fact that it was about us. And it was right for us. So I would say that people should do what's right for them. And listening tonight, a lot of what I hear is about community and about the family and the culture, and that's amazing. And it just doesn't exist, I think, so much on the kind of English side of the culture of the weddings. I mean, if anyone has been to an English wedding, no one there cares about what happens afterwards. Yeah. It's all about the food and getting drunk and and whether you can get a cab home. That's literally like an English wedding. What people wore, they really don't care what happens beyond that. Whereas I hear a lot more here that there is a lot more care about what happens before, during the actual process, and afterwards, which is fantastic. It's just the cost that seems like so massive to me.
Yeah. Totally disproportionate. So then the typical English, British weddings that you've attended, you say it's about catching a cab home. How big are these weddings?
So, it varies. It varied. The
500?
Oh, goodness, no. So I think, no. Well, on that, when I first started at Rackspace, one of the gentlemen I worked with, he was in the sales team. He was getting married, and he told me he had 1,200 people coming to his wedding. I almost passed out for him. And then when he told me the stories afterwards where their caterers let them down and they had to go locally on the day and find people to cater for 1,200 people, I was like, I'm sorry, this just isn't the stress that I want for my own day. So that played a part in making that decision. But I'd say maybe 70, 80 is about...
Double digits,
Yeah.
not even triple.
Not even... Triple is when people are getting, oh, fancy wedding.
Right.
You know, you're really like spending the money. When you're getting to like 100 plus, it's like, oh, calm down, you know. What do you know, how do you know all those people?
Yeah.
So I don't even think I know 70 people. So, you know, that would be a stretch.
And then, because the number of people is so low, do you have an idea of how much they spent? Are you okay to share how much you're...
Sure, absolutely. So one of my best friends, I went to his reception, and he had about 70 people at his wedding, and then a few more of us turned up for the reception. So he had a fantastic photographer, and then he went to... I want to say Sri Lanka and then the Maldives for his honeymoon afterwards. So I think all of that combined, that was maybe 7 or 8 years ago now as well, was about 24,000 pounds for all of that. So, you know, not bad in terms of an English wedding, including the honeymoon. We, all in on the 10 days, I think we spent just over £7,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, like, Asian photographers will charge more than that these days. So the whole shebang, holiday, honeymoon, everything.
So 10 days in Jamaica, all inclusive, the works, plus the wedding, plus the everything. But then, as I said, I'm very non-traditional when it comes to life, I think. My wedding dress I got from Monsoon, so it cost £200. You know, I tried it on, I thought, this looks really pretty. I'm going with that.
Right.
So
I will show you some Indian designer and how much they cost another time. Tell us what you think the difference then between a wedding and a marriage is.
I think a lot of emphasis is put on the wedding, and I feel, especially on the English side, the emphasis is about everyone else in the room, whereas the marriage long term is just the two of you and how you make it work going forward. And the one day, how much money you spend, all of that, that's what people talk about. They don't talk about how you're doing as a couple, what they can do to help, which I do hear a lot more of in this room, if I'm honest, which is nice to hear. There's a lot more support. From the English side, there's very little, maybe your close family care, but that's about it. Otherwise, really the whole day of an English wedding is about everyone else in the room, what they're eating for the reception dinner, making sure they don't get too drunk, you know, making sure everyone can get home safely and you don't have to confiscate anyone's keys. And then you're left to the marriage afterwards. Now, for us, it was slightly different because we lived together beforehand. We were together for 10 years before we got married. So we had already ironed out all those things that you only get to know after the wedding. But so, as I say, a little bit different for us. But yeah, for me, the difference is the day versus the long-term commitment. And people, certainly on the English side, don't really seem to care about the long-term commitment and supporting the couple through whatever that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to hear. What are your views then on the importance of marriage in modern Britain? So, culturally aside, and years later, are they as meaningful anymore? Does the state value them as much as they once did?
I think they are, because it's more about showing commitment to each other. I mean, if I'm honest, one of the reasons why I started to kind of push the idea of getting married is I got really worried one day. This thought popped into my head, well, if something happens to my partner rather than my husband, I have no rights with the decisions that happen to him in the hospital or anything like that. It's his parents have more rights than I do, whereas I've spent my life because I've been together with my husband since I was 18, so long time. And I just really started to panic about that type of stuff. And I think it is important because it shows the commitment. In terms of what the government sees as important about it. I don't think much in terms of marriage versus, not being married. There's not many benefits. I think personally, showing that commitment and being committed to each other, absolutely. Where society's getting a little less worried about whether some people are married or not. It's not really a thing. Even for kids, when people have kids, especially on the English side, they don't feel the need to be married. They sometimes have kids before marriage, and then it's a decision about names. And I think that's the most important decision they have to make, is what name the kid takes, rather than whether it actually matters that they have married parents.
Yeah, interesting. So then for our audience, could you maybe share what you think is the secret to a sustainable marriage?
I think for us it's honesty. Also, when your husband asks if anything is wrong, the answer of nothing is not okay, because it doesn't get you anywhere. I've had to learn that the hard way. No, my husband's, he's very open, honest, and he's pushed me to be more open with how we approach things, and we talk it out. It's not always comfortable, but it's about talking it out, being honest, but also, as the other speakers have said, to leave your egos behind, which I sometimes find very difficult. I think one of the reasons why someone has asked me is, we always joke at work when someone asks me for my opinion, I very sarcastically reply, sorry, I don't have any of those, because I have many of them. And sometimes that's that's a battle as well. I have to put that aside sometimes and just listen. So it's listening and honesty, I think, is key.
Very virtuous and endearing. So again, for our audience, any questions, comments you have for Mary Lou, please jot them down. And we thank you for being on stage.
Thank you.
Just before we get on to the question and answer, I'd like to redirect your attention back to the well-wisher table, which will be open after the question and answer, and we close today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're asking for £1 a month, which is 1p more than a Marmite bagel from Eat. And it will allow us to continue discussions like these. It will allow us to continue writing reports and follow up documents about the findings. And it will allow us to support the speakers who join us and share their expertise. I'd also like to bring to your attention that we have another Vichara Manthan event tomorrow taking place in Leicester, and it's taking place at the Y Theatre from 6 p.m. And it will be on futurism, the place of religion in artificial intelligence. So that will be a really interesting and insightful discussion. I'd like to hand back over to Sumit to conduct the question and answer. Thank you very much.
And the first question I have to ask is, what did you learn on your relationship course?
So there were two things I did. I read a book called Are You the One for Me by Barbara De Angelis. It's on Amazon, and it's a fantastic book, and the course was based on that. There's lots that's covered in the course, but I'll cover one thing, which I still haven't got quite right, but I think it's very interesting, is it's all about what they call love languages. So, for example, and my wife's smiling with a big grin on her face. So, for example, it's how one wants to be loved. And I think human beings take it for granted. How do you love someone? Is it words of affirmation? I love you, I love you, I love you. Is it words of, is it service? If you like someone serving you, is it gifts? Is it, so there's lots of different ways one can actually love someone and show that they love someone. And I think human beings take it for granted that that method in which the love is conveyed and implemented. And actually that's one thing, they call it the 6 love languages. So I highly recommend reading that book, because I can't go through exactly what's covered. But it's a very short book, and I actually read it on a flight from Miami to London. So I read it on one flight. It only takes about 7 hours of reading. But it honestly did change my life. I recommended it to every single person who was about to get married after me. They all bought it. So this author's making a lot of money from it, I must say. But it is worth it. And there's nothing, I don't think there's enough out there to guide people about the art of relationships. And I've read it, and I still haven't got it to a T. So it's a continual process.
I must add that to my Amazon wish list. So a question I think for the panel, maybe more towards Divyaji, is that the education on the concept of marriage, in particular Dharmic marriage, is something that we don't just learn suddenly. I mean, you can take courses, you could read books. When should we start educating our children about what a Dharmic marriage should be? When's the right time to start impacting, and how? How could we do that?
I think that it actually has to start from in the womb, not necessarily about the marriage, but Dharma. The principles of Dharma are no different for general life than from marriage. And so living a Dharmic life, which means truthfulness, honesty, and cleanliness, non-stealing, etc., are the basic ways that we should live life, and that should be from the very point of inception, conception. And then if it doesn't mean that you have to live a traditional life, but to live an honest life is a great achievement in itself. And the communication aspect as well. But the actual Dharmic marriage, it's going to be different. Children are going to develop at a different level themselves. But if you yourself are living a Dharmic marriage, then your children learn what Dharmic marriage is, and I think that's the real life lesson.
Yeah, I think so too. Anyone else want to jump in on that? Do you have any thoughts about when we should start educating people about how to be righteous and approach their wedding?
Sorry, I just want to add that before there was a lot of arranged marriages, and now it's you find your partner in universities and they're the one, and you battle with your parents and they agree. But I think there needs to be an understanding, especially when there's cultural differences. That certain people, like the Sikhs do it this way, Gujaratis do it this way. Even in Gujaratis, the Shahs do it this way, the Patels do it this way. There needs to be a level of understanding, not just with the couple, but with the families as well. Let's just encompass everything, and there needs to be a bit of give and take, which sometimes that causes friction within the relationships. And then when it comes to parent level, then the bride and groom level, it gets a bit sticky point. So I think when people are, talking about the Dharmic education, it should be, I think the couple need to learn it as well as the parents. They need to be educated as well.
So I think that leads quite neatly onto then one of the questions we have here is about sort of Jyotish horoscopes. When should that fit into a wedding? So finding your partner at college, university, the one, modern couples. Before it was more about what families thought were right for you. And so in light of these love marriages, instead of arranged marriages, what concept or how does Jyotish horoscopes fit into a wedding ceremony? And so I think we spoke about this before. Divyaji, have you got an opinion? Yeah.
Given my skin colour, it may be very surprising to you, but I do advocate checking horoscopes because from a scientific basis, because I actually have a lot of Jyotish friends in Varanasi, and we very often, even for white people, Western people, do look at the horoscopes, especially when there are difficulties. I'll give a specific example where two friends, I had known her before she got married, they didn't check their horoscope. They suffered 9 miscarriages, which would be enough to destroy most relationships. It didn't destroy their relationship, but they did want to know why they had to go through this. And what turned out was that although they had plenty of gunas matching, they had the same yoni, which meant that they were a brother-sister relationship, which meant that there was a lack of compatibility to create a child. On the basis of Jyotish, they actually have conceived, and the child has now been delivered after 9 very difficult miscarriages, even 2 going to full term. So I do for the long-term marriage do think that it is worth, and it's not superstitious based, but scientifically based reasons to consult a Jyotish, to see whether there are some difficulties in the planets that may affect your future, and to ensure that you have at least a smoother path than might be expected. And on the day, I think, which is where the question came from, I actually didn't realize that people were sticking to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because within India still it is that day in that season, in that month, and at that time also is still very important. And I personally would love to see that as part of the day, because having seen some of the energy that comes with that. But I can understand logistically in this country that may be very difficult. So perhaps you would like to.
So what is your thoughts on when the Maharaj says, okay, we'll do one extra mantra to make you compatible?
The bonus one.
Yeah.
So I think just to move further on, did you consult Jyotish? Did you engage in that with your expensive Panditji? Did he help you with the horoscopes?
Our budget didn't stretch that far, I'm afraid. No, we didn't. We didn't actually. It was not something we decided to do on ours. Whether we should have or not is it was just not a choice that my wife and I decided we wanted to embark upon. It may not be considered the most dharmic avenue, but we thought if there was going to be any challenges that we were going to have, we were going to have to address those between us and us alone. We took more of a kind of a practical approach. But yeah, I mean, that's not to discount anyone who does. I'm sure there are very good reasons for, and some people have got very good reasons for not doing it, but we opted not to.
And Marilu, the concept of consulting a horoscope, is that completely alien? Have you heard about this before?
No, I had never heard of. Well, I mean, I know you get horoscope in like your TV magazine, but apart from that, I wasn't aware that people consulted their horoscope to pick a specific day. I think that is challenging here, as you know, as people can attest to, because when you're already spending so much money to then make it a different day, and it makes it even more challenging. People won't turn up if it's a Wednesday, things like that. But no, I had never heard of that. It's an interesting. It's an extra thing to think about. It's another thing to worry about and to add to the stress and the pressure of planning the big day.
I think also, so we're talking about not just using Jyotish for choosing your partner, but for actually the day it should be on, and even the time. So I went to my cousin's wedding in India, and I was told there then that traditionally an Asian wedding should happen under the stars. So we had the party all sort of during the evening, and it wasn't until 2, 3 a.m. did we actually have the ceremony. Logistically, obviously, a challenge here. Have you ever conducted something like that for someone in this country?
Not in the. I mean, we've had evening wedding. That's because they wanted to do something different, but nothing like that. And the other thing is when Maharajas, they do the horoscopes and everything. Sometimes the kids aren't named when the child is born, where they look at the time and the day, and we're given letters, and we're supposed to name our kids, or our names are supposed to be after that. Now, if your child isn't named after that, so for a start, from birth, you've already changed your horoscopes there. And then some Maharajas here, they look at horoscopes and they consult people in India, which is 5 hours ahead. And you're in UK time, so it's just, I don't know, it's sometimes a bit... Sorry, go.
I was just going to say I'm going to be a little bit scientific with this and a little bit mean, but we're always under the stars. It's just we can't see them because the sun's shining. So when the stars don't go away just because we can't see them. So that would be my practical approach to that. Rather than 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm asleep at that time.
That's definitely fair enough. So then back to so a lot of emphasis on then the priest or the Panditji or the Maharaj that's conducting the ceremony. So for yourself, Pranav, in the discussion we had earlier, you said that the good priests or the better priests charge more money. why then do you think we have such high divorce rates? So 50% across Britain, and then Asians especially, used to be 10%, now gone up to 33%. So if the priests are so good, why are the divorce rates so high? Why are they not all taking courses and reading books?
I'm not sure if there is a correlation between a good and or expensive priest and the divorce rates. I think they're two separate matters. I mean, you can have a good priest will make a good wedding ceremony, not necessarily a good marriage. The reason why I believe there are quite high divorce rates is potentially, a lack of education, a lack of willing to learn how to make a marriage work, and a lack of willingness to really make it work on a day-to-day basis. I still believe it's a vocation. It's an ongoing life course. You never become an expert at it, I don't think. I think you become better at it. And it's a real shame because, the disillusion of anything is upsetting. Never mind a relationship, because it has the ability to really be destructive. Having said that, actually, some of the clients I've recently worked with have been the most happiest since being divorced, and they've been the most liberated. So I don't think, yes, the divorce rate may be high, and it may not be very Dharmic of me to say this, but actually sometimes it can be for the betterment of a couple, particularly if you've got children who are living in a very toxic environment, or a couple living in a very toxic environment. Sometimes a dissolution of a marriage is it should be a last resort, but sometimes it may well be the most effective resort.
Okay, so even if the Bundaji or the priest, the good ones that charge extra money, that would have no impact on that. That's fair enough. We can discuss that at further rate. We were talking earlier about the union of two people and letting go of egos and becoming unified as one. So, for example, in Mary Lou's case, it was just them two that went away to get married. Do you think we should all do this? Is that a Dharmic approach?
I think that it's neither Dharmic or adharmic. Because everybody has a different family situation, everybody has a different relationship with their partner, and one of the things that I said is balance is the most important thing, and things work for different people. Because Dharma ultimately, again, is about honesty and non-stealing and using your own rights as well. And if that is what is the final financial budget for yourselves, if that is the works for you for making the commitment, because it's about making a lifelong commitment. And if that way is what will work for bringing you together and uniting in one as two individuals within that, then it works. I think that you can't have that you've got to do it this way, and that is the very foundation of Hindu Dharma as well. That's why we have all the different sampradayas, and it's like you have your KG class and your PhD class within each sampradaya as well. So rituals, etc., are always adjusting to the specific situation at that moment in time, and the flexibility is what makes our Dharma work for so many people.
Okay, thank you. We've got one person who had a marriage with 500 people, 2 people. We've seen people with 2,000 people. How important is the community or having the extended family come to these arrangements? Are they there to support like we think they are, or do they just come to criticize? How important is the actual number of people there?
I think family is very important, because they've grown up with you. They've supported you every step of the way when you were little kids, universities. They want to be there for you. There are always going to be someone in the family who's going to say this, or the community are sometimes people are like friends, are like family, and if we have chosen our partner, then it's only fair that I would let my family invite their family and friends, because they have grown up with them. When they came to this country, they had that support network, and we shouldn't forget that. So just because we want a small, lavish wedding, let's arrange something for the parents so they feel because everyone gets invited to each other's sons and daughters' weddings, so we should just be, in return, let the parents have something that they feel proud of, because it's a big moment for them as well.
Yeah, I'm hearing invite lots of people, so spend lots more money. I know for a fact at my wedding there'll be a lot of people there. Some families come with a number of 50 people attached. It's an enormous amount. Maybe from a legal perspective, or actually for the entire panel, what do we think about the recent government announcement for the legal recognition of a civil agreement for heterosexual couples? So it's already in place for homosexual people, but for heterosexuals, so opposite sex that are already in a partnership, now they can legally have a civil partnership. What implications does that have for the future? I think the same applies then for quick, no-fault divorces. What are we doing here? What do we think about that? From a legal perspective?
From legal, I can't answer that.
I think from an equitable perspective, it's now put those who are homosexual and those who are heterosexual on an equal footing in that regard, which I think is a positive. I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and I quite like the institution of marriage. And what this may mean is that actually more people may consider not getting married, because actually there are rights that now follow from this notion of being in a civil partnership. I think it's a positive, because not everybody wants to, embark on this institution of marriage. But I hope that when people decide to take on this arrangement, they give it just as much thought as they would if they were to get married, because there are going to be some ramifications that come with it if a civil partnership were not to work out. So I think it ought to be given just as much serious consideration, even though it's not a wedding per se.
I think it gives people an opportunity to have the same benefits of a marriage, just without, if they don't want necessarily the religious aspect of what a wedding would be, so just thinking about marriage vows and the traditional marriage vows from an English wedding, they're very, to use a phrase that's used a lot now, I don't like it, but patriarch, yeah. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. I can't think of how to say the word. But yes, they're more towards honouring and obeying the husband, whereas it's loving and cherishing the wife. So it takes that away from it as well. So people feel that they're on more equal footing when they go into the partnership, rather than when you look at the marriage vows in an English wedding, they're very, one-sided to a certain degree. So I didn't realize my wedding in Jamaica was going to be a religious wedding. It was. It didn't bother me. I'm not particularly religious. My husband is a little bit, I would say. So it was quite nice that it was, I didn't mind, but it was nice for him. I thought it was going to be more of a civil wedding, but it didn't mind. The minister told me off for almost putting my bouquet on the ground, because that would have been disaster. Because that's going to make a difference long term. But yeah, I do see it as beneficial, because people will feel more on equal footing, and also it has the less religious connotation. So maybe more people will do it because they don't feel it has that kind of undertone to it. But yes, I do hope that they take it as seriously as when people go into a marriage or a wedding, because otherwise, if we do have the other side of the coin where it's more no contest, then that rate of divorce is just going to go up, because people aren't willing to work anymore. At anything, it seems. Everyone just wants everything on a plate. And marriage is work. Whether you deeply love the person or not, you have to be willing to put the effort in, otherwise there's just no point.
So I'm aware that we're pressed for time, so I think one of the last questions we're going to ask is, are weddings killing marriages? Are they even against each other? And are marriages dying because of weddings? Nobody wants to answer that.
I can kickstart that. I don't think weddings are killing marriages. I think it's setting people up on the wrong foot sometimes, just with all the stress, the debt sometimes that it comes with. So there's another hurdle, especially for people who haven't lived together, who then have to all of a sudden live together, pay off this debt. That stress and that build up to the day just gets released afterwards, and then it's almost like, especially if you've had a fantastic day, and then like the other side, you get the wedding blues, they call it, where you've had this massive build up to the actual day, then all of a sudden you're just married. There's no party to look forward to, there's no like fun, there's no fancy outfits, but also the debt and everything. I don't think it kills the marriage. I think there's more underlying if that happens, but it certainly doesn't always set people up for initial success, and I think it just makes things a little bit harder just afterwards, and you have to kind of get over that, especially talking about the big weddings and the ones that come with all the pressure and the money and stuff like that.
Anyone else want to chime in? Are we pitting them against each other?
I'd just like to say that, again, it comes to balance. When you are planning your wedding and marriage, obviously you're making lifelong commitment, but you have to choose a wedding that is appropriate to your financial status, and the way that you live socially, and for in keeping with the way that you're going to live life, because you have to deal with the ramifications after the marriage, budget-wise, etc. And of course, everyone wants to get invited to everybody else's wedding, and you know that means that you have to invite them to your wedding. But you also have to be realistic about what you can afford and what is appropriate in your social and financial situation. And you have to be realistic. It's not they say like a fairy tale wedding, for, in Western terms. You always wake up after that dream, and you have to be realistic. You've got to be able to live with the decisions you've made for that day, because they will live with you for the rest of your life. So it also has to be at the level that will give you the enjoyment, and you have to be able to live without regret in both ways. Neither that we didn't do enough, nor did we overdo it. So it's about balance. And if you've got a balanced mind, ego and intellect, then you're going to be able to make the right decisions. And that goes for your whole life. So that making the foundation of you as a person is the most important thing, whether you're doing your wedding or your marriage or just living life.
Yeah, sorry, just to add, I think understanding each other, going out with each other is one thing, which is spending time, going to movies, dinners and everything. But it's also spending time with each other's families, because parents get introduced, then you're there for 1 or 2 hours, and then you go back to your own environment. Then the parents don't actually spend time with each other's families, and then until the big day, and then that causes a lot of aggro sometimes, because there's a lack of understanding from each other's cultures. Just it's more time quality time with each other, rather than time. Yes, we do spend time with each other's families, but it's quality time, and how you find out about each other is going to be important.
Thank you. So lots of thoughts, lots of things to mull over, to churn, to month-on with. So weddings versus marriages, not necessarily pitted against each other. Could it be a modern dichotomy? Do we need to compare? Is it just cost as a barometer, the energy, the time that we invest? Hearing lots of things from our experts, and I thank them all for coming. I thank you all for being in the audience too. Now, it's just an understanding that this was just the beginning of the conversation. We won't let it end here. Vichar Manthan as a whole will be writing a report. We'll have a study session. The questions that we haven't yet got to answer, we will be asking our panel at a later date. Please check in on our website to have a look at some of those things. And just to conclude here that the work that we're doing, trying to contribute to modern society with some of the ancient wisdom that we can unlock, doesn't happen for free. Venue, time, people. So I urge you to fill out the well wishes form. And again, it's not about just being a one-off donation. This is lifelong work that we're trying to do here in scholarly and academia. So again, I thank you for your attendance. If you have further questions, stay for afterwards. Please check out the website. A professional recording of this will go online. And I hope to see you all perhaps tomorrow at the event we have in Leicester. If not, at a future London West event. Thank you very much.